You're listening to Data Center Therapy. Please take a number, and an engineer will be right with you.
Welcome back to Data Center Therapy, a podcast from Ivoxy Consulting that talks all things IT with a healthy dose of empathy. I'm your host, Matt Yeti. In each episode, we dive into the myriad of technologies that make up this beautiful sandbox called IT that we all play in. We share our hopes, our dreams, opinions, both positive and critical alike, all with a touch of empathy, because at the end of the day, we all need a seat on that couch. Joining me today on Data Center Therapy is Jeff Hicks, Technical Partner Manager at NetApp. Jeff, thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Matt. Looking forward to chatting with you today.
No, absolutely. This has been a long time coming. I mean, NetApp is a very deep, important partner of Ivoxy. I mean, this is it basically our birth was co-joined with the existence of NetApp and the technologies that NetApp enables in the virtual environment, and it's just been a great partnership. And finally, get you on the podcast is something we've been looking forward to. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your career up to this point?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been with NetApp now for about 5 years. Grew up in Oregon and transplanted to Chicago along with my previous employer, Symantec, and was out there running a Symantec business for about 10 years. And a couple of years ago, we transplanted back to Portland, and we're really happy to be back in the Pacific Northwest. So I've been in IT for about 15 years, and like I mentioned, 10 years hard time with Symantec and 5 years light time here with NetApp.
So as a technical partner manager, how long have you been in that role with NetApp?
Pretty much my entire career. So I've been both with Symantec and with NetApp. I was a technical partner manager or a channel SC. You could call it a couple different things, but that's been my core responsibility the entire time.
Well, I mean, you've been awful busy, especially recently, because just a little over a week ago, NetApp INSIGHT 2019 wrapped in Las Vegas.
Yeah, it sure did. So we were there in a very unusually cold Las Vegas. Had a great time, as we always do. This was my 5th INSIGHT, and one of the things I always like to comment in terms of INSIGHT and my experience there is, when I left Symantec, I thought I was getting into a hardware company. And it was pretty quickly I realized that after my first INSIGHT that I was going to be tagged to be the software/cloud guy. So that's been really my focus at NetApp for the past several years is on our cloud stack. And it's been nice to see it mature over these last several years. And once we get into talking about the INSIGHT payload, we'll talk about how it was a little bit different than the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, cloud is so pervasive, and it is driving everybody forward, and it's get on the train or be left behind. And NetApp is one of those companies that when I've been playing on my side, my expertise built in the Azure side when it comes to my cloud expertise, to see some of the products that NetApp's come out with, it's very much not a me too, because you can get that feel sometimes when you're seeing a lot of these product offerings from vendors, and it doesn't feel that way with NetApp. It feels like you guys are more on the front foot than necessarily reacting, which is good to see.
Yeah. I think it goes back to, when I first joined NetApp and not really understanding the strategic direction early on. And, the vision, which it took me a bit to understand was that, hey, we're not going to build our own cloud. And rather than build our own cloud and try to push customers into that, we took the direction of, we're going to work and put software solutions and capabilities into every cloud. And instead of focusing on one particular cloud, we want all of those clouds to be able to collaborate and all of our technologies in those clouds. And now we're really taking that vision and expanding that out to the private cloud and doing that so in an integrative approach.
So NetApp's, like I mentioned, a very important partner. You've been partnering with us on our VMworld Redux events that we've been running over the last few weeks. So with regards to INSIGHT, give me a little bit of Redux, if you would. What are the main takeaways that those who wouldn't have been at the conference would want to know?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mentioned that it was quite a different payload than the last few years. I think over the last few years, we certainly had a lot of cloud technology that released. Obviously, we had our hardware platforms as well that we brought to market. But I've been talking about this INSIGHT as a little bit of a maturing of the data fabric, a little bit of a hardening of that. As we look at some of the security capabilities we released at INSIGHT, they certainly speak to that. I think we've reached this inflection point with what we call our cloud data services organization, where we have a lot of platforms that are available in the public cloud. In fact, we're now adding 15 new customers into our cloud data services stack every day. And that's the series of technologies that live in AWS, Azure, and GCP. We've reached this inflection point, so we're really shifting our gears to center more around the maturity of that, and also then taking that experience, what we've done over the last 5 years in the public cloud, and translating that into private cloud technologies. So that's where a lot of the focus was at Insight and some of the releases that we published. So, some of the cloud capabilities, we certainly had some new hardware platforms as well that we can talk about today. And then we also released something, and this is probably one of the most compelling things, maybe not so much for the technical guys, but certainly the CFO and other people in the organizations that we work with that want to buy in a new compelling way. NetApp announced something called NetApp Keystone, which is not just a transition of the technology that we have into the private cloud environment, but also the consumption model of cloud, and giving companies an option to buy OpEx in their data center.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good adjustment. And to your point, right, a lot of the engineers I talk with, even though it doesn't necessarily change the bits and the bytes and how we get things done in a data center, the ability for our owners and our financial people in our companies that enable us and make sure payroll goes through and that we get paid and get food on our table, the easier it is for them to acquire equipment and product and solutions. That affects all of us. If they can't take down a large cap spend, then it's game over for all of us. So it's good to see those additional options. Now, from what I understand, Keystone has some interesting, we all know about, well, we should, cloud consumption models, right? Pay as you go. How does that work when it comes to on-prem, or does it matter? Is that the whole point of Keystone?
That's a big part of it, right? It shouldn't matter, and it's really twofold. So from a technical perspective, we've moved forward with the technologies that we have in the public cloud, being able to be deployed on premise in an OpEx consumption model, but with the same interfaces, with the same capabilities, and managed in the same way that you would something like our cloud volume services in AWS as you would on something like NetApp HCI. So that it's really a synonymous experience for the developer that's trying to put forth an application and maybe have it run in a hybrid multi-cloud environment, and give them the capability to deploy something in AWS in the exact same way with the exact same tools that they would deploy that in their own on-premise private cloud. And then the OpEx tie-ins to that means that they can actually pay for and consume those resources in the same way that they do in the public cloud. And that really supports kind of that methodology that we see CIOs and organizational leadership moving forward and trying to build out environments that embrace that developer mindset and help them, really try new things, try new ideas without these massive investments to move their projects forward.
Now, you mentioned the hybrid cloud infrastructure, and I feel like this is a pretty serious pillar of what NetApp wants to do to execute this vision of private and public, cloud portability. Can you talk a little bit more about that? How is it different? Because people see hybrid cloud, good or bad, they see HCI. They see hyperconverged. I know it doesn't stand for hyperconverged, it stands for hybrid cloud infrastructure, but it's HCI, which kind of tongue-in-cheek, kind of a wink, but I think it does sow a little confusion. So can you shed a little light on what makes that hyperconverged, or what makes it not hyperconverged?
Absolutely. I think, I always go back to what is an end result? What is the end result in terms of really any piece of technology? If the goal at the end of the day is to have a box that does both server processing and also, compute processing and storage all in the same, neat little kit, then you can achieve that in a lot of different ways. You could even argue that you could achieve that with your own build your own units and some automation and some coding in between that. So what we've really moved forward with is trying to make sure that HCI, from a NetApp perspective, is the core pillar for the data fabric. So it is your home base in terms of the data fabric. And I think that's a key element for what we've done, is made sure that everything we do within our HCI stack is integrated with the public cloud, and it's integrated with the data fabric. And that's really what makes it different. I mean, if you want to break down the way the hardware works, IDC came out and defined our platform as what we call disaggregated HCI, which is a little bit of a different view than maybe Gartner and certainly the historical look at HCI, would be called. But for us, it's again about that end result. And if the end result is a converged stack of resources that enables hybrid cloud methodologies, then that's what we're seeking to go after. And that's what we've done. Like I mentioned, we put our public cloud experience and we've taken that and dropped that into our HCI platform from both a purchase model perspective and a technology perspective.
So would it be accurate to say that, and when we talk about traditional HCI, and we had an episode 3 or 4 episodes ago where we kind of did a shootout between Matt Coslino, David Crow, and myself about HCI and the concepts around it. One of the big knocks is scale, basically flexibility of scale. And with a hybrid cloud and your term disaggregated HCI, is this something that if I need storage, I don't need to buy CPU and RAM and vice versa?
Absolutely. And there's plenty of values just baked into the disaggregated HCI. When you think about a traditional HCI approach and you need storage, you also have to buy compute. And when you have to buy compute, you also have to increase your license count for your hypervisor and your database licensing. You increase your core count, so your licensing increases. So from a hardware perspective, NetApp HCI is very unique in that it gives you the ability to scale both the compute and the storage independently. But the management is where it all comes down and how it's deployed, and that's what makes it simple and easy, and that's what to me makes it HCI-like. But we really try to focus more on what is the software capability, how does it integrate with the development pipeline, and that's where we really center on the value of our platform. Because we could talk about hardware variants all day long and why one is better than the other. But if at the end of the day, you can't treat that piece of hardware as infrastructure as code and automate all the day-to-day work out of it, then you're kind of back 10 years ago again, where the end result is not different than it used to be.
It's a really good point. So Jeff, in leading up to this, obviously we do our pre-communication. That's no secret to anybody listening out there. But and you provided some talking points that you thought would be interesting to go around, and then we do it on our side and back and forth. I'm gonna lay on the therapy couch right now, and I'm gonna make a pretty deep admission here. You made a talking point. You put a point out there that really made me think and adjust my take. Now, anybody who's listened to this podcast knows that as of yet, I have not jumped on the container bandwagon. And it's not because I don't want to. It's because I just have to sit here and I say, who benefits? Why? Is it better? Is it easier? I don't care if it's different. I really don't. Make that difference worthwhile to me, and I can buy into it. So I'm still, and I've said it, I'll just summarize. This is more for, if you're a developer, this is great. But if I'm a consumer or an ops guy or an engineer, I'm not in love with it yet because there's so much more burden put on me at this point in the container lifecycle. And I think things like the NetApp's HCI platform is starting to come around and polish that and put a little bit of orchestration to it finally. But the point that you made, developers are the new kingmakers. That's word for word. And I took that point and I said, all right, Matt, get off your high horse, because it's not about what you want or how you consume it. In fact, you as an ops guy, you are enabling a tool set that your company consumes to make the gears turn. And if that is a developer, it doesn't matter that the developers aren't IT traditionally, right? They're not infrastructure. They're the consumers of your infrastructure just as much as accounting might use finance software that you have to install no matter what that finance software looks like. It just shakes me to my core because it does so much encroach on the infrastructure piece that I'm so comfortable with. But you said it. Once I look at it that way, yeah, they're just the new consumer of this infrastructure and they need it done in a different way. So we're talking about Element from NetApp, right? That's really the face of the HCI. That's what I understand, correct?
Yeah, underneath the covers, Element is certainly it's where the API resides. It's where a lot of the integration with the development pipeline exists. You mentioned this concept, right? Developers are the new kingmakers. And, to understand that, you have to just step back for 1 second and mentioned the groan-worthy term digital transformation, right? And I say groan-worthy because we're all tired of saying it, but it's still a necessity for every organization. We see it time and time again. Blockbuster not innovating fast enough and getting Netflix out of business. Just that type of mindset. It happens everywhere, every day, and we're seeing it more and more. And it's that specific reason that there was a book written called The New Kingmakers, and it's about developers, and it's targeted to CIOs. And it's targeted to CIOs in the sense of this is what you need to do to actually retain and attract these types of resources. I'd say, and I'd even argue that yes, there's steps that you have to take internally to attract those types of resources, but also from an infrastructure perspective, you have to create the pathways and the avenues for a developer to be successful, for them to be able to want to stay at your organization, or otherwise they're just going to go somewhere else. And so you need an infrastructure that is light of foot, makes it easy for you to adapt. And then that is in itself going to start attracting those developers. If you start shutting down pathways to AWS and trying to push developers in a specific direction and put a lot of guardrails around what they can do, they're going to get frustrated pretty quickly, and you're going to lose that critical resource that you need to retain. Because when that call to adapt and change comes, you don't know when it's going to come. And when it does, it could be immediate. And your competitor did something amazing, and you have to change and adapt. If you don't have those people on staff when that moment comes, you're kind of going to be in a world of hurt, and you're going to find yourself suffering from a revenue perspective. So it's really about, developers are the new kingmakers, applications are the new money makers. And so how do IT and the leadership team really adapt and accommodate them? And, it's really all of that conceptual story is sort of the basis of NetApp's product strategy. Like, what are we doing to enable that hybrid multi-cloud environment? We recognize that there's plenty of people that want a private cloud and they want to build an infrastructure, that is for themselves and that is isolated, that they can secure and make compliant in a specific way. But they have to do that in a way that still remains connected to the hybrid multi-cloud. And so that's where our strategy is really centered on, is building technologies in a data fabric that enables that and helps those CIOs attract and retain those types of resources.
So, okay, so let's say I own an infrastructure, but we're still in and not speaking poorly about it, but the traditional stack, right, of servers and compute completely separate, but we want to still be nimble, be flexible, be agile enough to adopt with the cloud. You mentioned new hardware products announced at Insight as well. I'm assuming we're talking about the AFF line, FAS line of ONTAP running products. Talk a little bit about that and how I'm still not, I'm not left out on an island with this whole cloud party by going with one of these platforms still.
Right. And absolutely. And, even within ONTAP, we've made it fully REST API enabled to move down that pathway. About a year and a half ago, we put a lot of investment into our ONTAP product line to enable it with NVMe over Fiber Channel. We now have Optane support for persistent class memory. So we're not leaving that infrastructure focus behind. I think we're way ahead of the ball in terms of where we are in that space in the market. And we've even, taken it to that next step. What we did at Insight is with the AFF A400 release, we released an NVMe over Fiber Channel platform, but one that you can also attach your traditional SAS SSD shelves to. So you really have that opportunity with the A400 to essentially evolve into NVMe, because most of the NVMe arrays out there in the world today, it's NVMe or nothing in terms of the actual drives that live inside the system. So that's what I really like about the A400, is that ability to evolve into NVMe and essentially, take those steps over time.
I wanted to ask you your definition and a little bit of a deep dive, your insight, so to speak, on the term that NetApp uses all the time, and it's at the core, really, of your roadmap, is data fabric.
Yeah.
And I think even within my colleagues, it's thrown around and it's just assumed that definition is known. But can you paint a better picture for me and those who might be listening, that what exactly do you mean when you talk about data fabric?
Absolutely. So data fabric is a methodology to free the mobility of your data between environments and do it in a way that you can manage with the same policy framework, regardless of the environment the data lives in. And that's really it. I mean, it is a conceptual thing, and there's a lot of products that flow into that. But that's the core, is that if tomorrow I need my data there, it should be there exactly when I need it. And if I need to bring it back, I should be able to do that easily. And then more importantly, I'm managing that data, and I should be able to do it in the exact same way, regardless of what environment that lives in.
Well, so basically a flex file that tiers off to the cloud seamlessly. So as an example of data fabric.
Absolutely, it's one of the
cool.
one of the big core use cases, and we did make that you're referring to our technology called Fabric Pool, and we've did some enhancements that were announced at Insight around Fabric Pool mirroring. But yeah, that's one example of what we call data fabric technology. Is this ability to take your cold blocks that are sitting on expensive flash disk and tier that off to a much cheaper object store. And in the data fabric vein, right, that object store could be your own private object store that you built. It could be Azure Blob. It could be GCP. It could be AWS S3. So there's a lot of flexibility because, again, we try to open up all the pathways for where and what cloud your data should be in.
Well, you mentioned, in the last year and a half, you've been building in NVMe support, et cetera. Well, obviously before that, but releasing that. One thing I've noticed that NetApp has really turned heel on is releases of ONTAP. I remember when it was 18 to 24 months between major releases, which, while I can certainly respect and understand the desire to let things bake before they're ready for production, not to say that it's one or the other. But I think if you were sitting on a 2-year release cycle now between releases, your features would fall vastly behind the competition. So you're at 2 major point releases a year is the goal, I believe, right?
Yeah, and we've been meeting that now for a couple years. And I think what to me it speaks to more than anything is we're not just putting forth an idea, we're eating our own idea. We're eating our own cooking, right? We don't just behave as a traditional, development shop. We don't sit back and use the old tools. We're container-based in a lot of our methodologies. We use the public cloud where it makes sense. And, that's an approach that has helped us accelerate that development lifecycle within ONTAP. And yeah, there's so many great things that go into ONTAP that a lot of people aren't even aware of now because the rate of release is so accelerated now. So it really comes down to what do you need, and make sure you do the investigation to see if it's there, because it probably is. Just for example, at Insight last week, we have something called Flex Groups, which is a globally distributed, massively scalable file share that scales and does self-balancing and self-healing across an entire ONTAP cluster. I have talked to customers all the time that aren't even aware of Flex Group, but it's a great way to present a massive file space through a single namespace. And last week we added NFS v4 and v4.1 to that capability, so clients can take advantage of Kerberos and access control lists that NFS4 introduced. So little things like that, little nuggets, right? We don't talk about them certainly as much as we used to. A few years ago, a new ONTAP functionality was what we were all shouting from the mountaintops. But just as much as we're excited about that, we're excited about Keystone. We talked a little bit about that. We're excited about the new security capability that we released last week as a part of Cloud Insights. So my feedback on ONTAP is, if you are a user of ONTAP, obviously and hopefully you're staying in tune with all the releases and all the capabilities. There's plenty of people that write blogs on them, and there's a lot of information out there that can get you familiarized with them. Just for instance, last week we also enhanced System Manager by leaps and bounds, right? It's all HTML5 now. We simplified most of the GUI so that every step is a single page, including LUN provisioning and volume provisioning, right? And a couple of years ago, we would have been really excited about that. And it's not that we're not excited about that. It's just back to that line, that tagline of developers of the new Kingmakers, right? It's our job to know the infrastructure, and it's our job to kind of understand those new capabilities and understand how they can help us automate our infrastructure more so we can address the developers' needs faster.
Yeah, and I'm so glad to hear you mention that because as a partner, that was one of my few struggles when I'm talking about NetApp with customers is that you've got all of these features. So ultimately, there are all of these knobs and buttons that are just going to have to be exposed at some point because when you have this set of capabilities, you can only boil it down so much. So to see NetApp making massive efforts and leaps to simplify the management while still maintaining all the capability of ONTAP and growing that, but being able to boil down the management interface to something that's really easily consumable and tinkerable is huge because that's always been the thing. I mean, at Ivoxy, we've got so much NetApp out there because it is the Swiss Army knife. It can fit everybody's infrastructure in one way or the other. And to see the management come down and kind of catch up with the capabilities, not in complexity, but in simplicity, is an effort that I'm so glad that NetApp went forward with.
Yeah. And along the same lines, we've put a lot of investment into building out Ansible and Chef cookbooks, public cookbooks, things that make life easier and automation easier, because automation is not an easy task to take on. So you need a company that you work with, that you invest in, that actually simplifies some of those things as well, so that the pathway to infrastructure as code could be very challenging, but we spend a lot of time and a lot of work trying to simplify that. And if you are someone that is pursuing infrastructure as code, I highly recommend the pub.io. It is NetApp's home for developers and NetApp's home for infrastructure as coders. It's where you'll find essentially all of our GitHub resources and be able to leverage those and easily track down what those cookbooks are and how to use them.
Oh, that's great link on that, Jeff. I'll make sure we can put that on the page too with the podcast notes. And that's where we come in at Ivoxy too, in that anybody can install a NetApp for you, right? And they've made it that simple. It's here's now what we've seen out in the field. Here's how we've seen our customers take advantage of these advanced automation workbooks and workflows to take that amazing piece of hardware, take that Ferrari now to the next level. And let's take it out in the track and be able to make it really sing. So it's just great to see these companies that have really been the kingmakers for the industry going along now, coming around and continuing to innovate and not just be comfortable to rest on their laurels of the legacy stuff. It's great to see NetApp pushing forward. And your job, Jeff, has certainly gotten more complex because with all these releases, you got to keep me up to date. I got to know what I got to. Well, I got to know what I got to know.
Yeah, I mean it is hard. I mean I've been spending a lot of time as of late with our NetApp Kubernetes service, and that's a whole separate stack that you have to understand. And I recently went through a few days of Kubernetes deep dive training and understand it much better after going through that. But that in itself, that's a very unique approach, a unique acquisition we made, and the way that we're integrating that is in my mind absolutely the direction that all manufacturers, all vendors need to go. One of the things I love about NetApp Kubernetes service is, for one, we've taken that and integrated it into NetApp HCI so that when you go into the interface and go to build your Kubernetes cluster, you can select AWS, you can select Azure or GCP, but you can now also select NetApp HCI as a home for those master and worker nodes. So that's a big step in that right direction of enabling that hybrid multi-cloud. We took that approach, and we've evolved that. We also took something that we have in the cloud called Cloud Volume Service, which is a high performance file system that lives in all three of the major hyperscalers. We're bringing that to HCI as well. So we're really just simplifying this process of what should a private cloud look like and how should it integrate with the public cloud. So we're taking those steps to embrace that developer community. And I like to think of NetApp Kubernetes Service as, a site reliability engineer, all in one, right? Packaged up, because site reliability engineer, it's their job to own an application stack, right? Regardless of where it lives. That is their responsibility. They're more linked to a line of business than a traditional IT admin. And they don't care if their component lives in AWS or Azure or in the private cloud. They own it regardless of where it lives. And so when I look at what Kubernetes service does within HCI is simplifies that process of deploying the infrastructure underneath a Kubernetes environment, which is in a lot of cases what an SRE will do. And I know a lot of companies out there don't have that ability to adapt into, acquiring SREs, and it takes a while for, IT admin to kind of develop those methodologies. So in my mind, it's a shortcut if you want to start, developing environments around Kubernetes. It's a really easy way to, one, try it and not spend too much money. But two, it's a way to build those environments in a reliable and, more importantly, secure way.
Every conversation I have, I realize more and more that if you don't want to be near containers, go find a different industry to be in, because they are everywhere, and it does seem to be the future. Jeff, it's been a long time coming to get you on the show, and thank you so much for taking time out. It's been a really exciting time for NetApp and the cloud in general, and really appreciate working with you. And it was good to see you this week at Redux.
Yeah, it was great seeing you and the team as well. I appreciate you guys having me on, and I look forward to next time.
Likewise, yeah. Well, that concludes this episode of Data Center Therapy. You can find us and subscribe to the show everywhere fine podcasts are found. Be sure to follow us on social media and share with a friend. We're everywhere, including Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. You can also find all of our information at our website at datacentertherapy.com. You can also support the podcast by reviewing us on iTunes and giving us a healthy 5-star review. Thanks so much for listening. I'm Matt Yeti. Take care, good night, and good luck.